Emma is my name. At the age of 27, I never imagined that I would be here, sharing my experience in this manner. I always thought my life would go like everyone else's. You know, the cliched tale of meeting someone, falling in love, and starting a family. Before the day I said something I sincerely regret, I thought that was my reality for a long time. David and I had been wed for nearly 3 years. I believed we were meant to be together when we first met in college. He was charming, ambitious, and so full of life, everything I had imagined wanting. Like any marriage, we had our ups and downs, but at the time, I thought nothing could separate us. I had a nice career, a nice house, and a boyfriend who loved me and seemed to care for me. At least it felt like life was good. I have vivid memories of that day. We were sitting on the couch on a quiet Sunday afternoon, discussing nothing significant. I had spent the day cleaning the house while David had been working long hours at his job. Even though we were exhausted, it was one of those times when you just appreciate the other person's peaceful presence. Even though I was aware of the minor rifts in our relationship that I hadn't fully addressed, we were in that place where everything felt fine. I sensed that our distance was widening and that we had not been as close as we once were, but I was at a loss for words. I thought it was humorous when David joked that he was still getting used to the whole marriage thing. Then, without thinking, I said something that would alter everything, something I didn't mean. I recall the words escaping my lips before I could stop them. I married you, but I deeply regretted it. As far as I was concerned, it was a joke. I had no intention of hurting him or leading us down a path that would ruin everything we had worked so hard to achieve. However, I could sense a change in the atmosphere between us as soon as I said those words. The room itself seemed to have suddenly grown heavier and colder. David's smile vanished, and he just looked at me for a while as if he was still in shock over what I had just said. I went into a panic. I didn't mean it. I was just kidding around, I answered, my voice trembling a little. David, it was just a joke. You know that. However, he took some time to reply. He simply gazed at me, searching my eyes, and I noticed something unusual for the first time in a long time. I couldn't help but notice the hurt in his eyes, and I instantly wished I could take those words back. I made an effort to laugh it off, but it had lost its humor. It was never amusing. With the weight of all that was unsaid between us, he exhaled deeply and for a long time. His voice was hardly audible above a whisper when he questioned, "You regret marrying me?" I wanted to retract everything and apologize, but the words stuck in my throat. Is that how you really feel? I couldn't look him in the eye, so I just nodded. I sensed the gap between us growing like an imperceptible wall. I was gradually being formed around our relationship. I never intended to hurt him, and I never intended for it to get this bad. However, as I sat there attempting to explain myself, I became aware that I had also changed on the inside. That jest and that thoughtless comment were more than simply a passing remark. They were a reflection of something deeper that I had been trying to ignore for months. I was no longer able to ignore the annoyance, the unsaid tension, or the sense of being misinterpreted. They were all rising to the surface. David got up and moved to the opposite side of the room, his face unreadable. My heart sank as I watched him, and I knew in my heart that the joke I had spoken was only the tipping point and not the root of the issue. For so long, I had been clinging to something, acting as though nothing was wrong, yet it was anything. But things would never be the same again, I realized as the silence between us deepened. Some of the most difficult days of my life were those that followed my thoughtless comment. I believed that David would realize that I was being foolish at the time, and that I didn't mean it once the shock had subsided. However, rather than in overcoming it, things only appeared to worsen. To put it mildly, our initial conversation following the occurrence was awkward. David wasn't ready to let it go, and I could tell by the look in his eyes. He had changed, but I still feared losing him. He had always been the kind of person who could ignore things, forgive, and go on without harboring resentment. However, the pain was more profound than I had anticipated this time. Despite my best efforts to explain that it wasn't how I felt, I found myself apologizing all the time. I pleaded, "I didn't mean it, David," as I spoke. David only gazed at me, his face tightening with each word I said. You know I love you. It was just a dumb joke. Please don't let this ruin us. His quiet was 1,000 times worse than any dispute we had ever had, even though he didn't scream or snap. He seemed to be excluding me entirely, and every effort I made to close the distance just served to widen it. He finally responded, "You don't get it, Emma," in a cool yet aloof tone. I wanted to fight, to tell him that I didn't mean it, but something in his voice made me stop. You can't just say something like that and expect everything to be okay. You can't take it back. There was a noticeable hurt in his remarks, and I couldn't help but feel guilty. With one thoughtless remark, I had taken something delicate, our relationship, and destroyed it. In the back of my mind, I began to question whether I had already lost him or if it was too late to make things right. Weeks passed, and the household atmosphere became oppressive. The light-hearted discussions we used to have about our goals and aspirations for the future have become infrequent. Now the only things we talked about were the practical ones, like which bills to pay, who would take out the garbage, and what time we had to be somewhere. I had to get compensated. Despite sharing a space, we had turned into strangers who merely passed one another without truly interacting. David began to spend an increasing amount of time away from home. I was left alone in our home when he stayed late at work or occasionally went out with friends. Every time he left, I couldn't help but feel a knot in my stomach, wondering if he was really still in this marriage or if he was beginning to permanently alienate himself from me. Every day that went by made me feel more and more empty without him. He stayed as far away as ever, and I longed for some indication that he still cared, that he hadn't completely given up on us. I asked him if we could sit down and discuss everything one evening. I was holding out hope that we could start to mend the harm if we had an open discussion. However, he gave me a chilly response when I asked. His words sliced through the atmosphere, like ice. He didn't even look at me when he said, "I don't know what you want me to say, Emma. What's done is done. I can't just pretend that what you said didn't affect me." I was struck like a ton of bricks by the pain in his voice. This was the first time I had ever seen him like this. I had never seen this aloof, irate David before. I felt as though I was speaking to a completely different person. It dawned on me then that I had shattered something inside of him. No matter how much I apologized, it seemed like he couldn't go past the hurt I had caused. The trust and ease we had once had were gone. I made an effort to be optimistic and think that things would get better, but the gap between us widened every day. I felt as if I was losing him one piece at a time, and there was nothing I could do about it. After a long day at work, I got home one evening to find David packing his stuff. My heart stopped beating. With a quivering voice, I questioned, "What are you doing?" His face was unreadable when he glanced up at me. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. "I'm leaving, Emma. I need some space. I don't know how to fix this anymore. I don't know if I can." I felt as though the floor had been torn out from under me, and my heart broke. His expression informed me that he had already made up his mind, even though I wanted to plead with him to stay and assure him that we could resolve this. There was nothing I could do to stop him from leaving me. I tightened my throat and murmured, "I'm sorry." But I knew it was too late. The days following David's departure were a haze. Tried to convince myself that things would improve by going through the motions, going to work, and returning home to an empty house. However, I knew deep down that something had broken inside of him, something that I couldn't mend with a few words of kindness or an apology. I realized for the first time in my life what it was like to be genuinely alone. There was an overwhelming hush in our home. Not only was David gone, but so was everything we had been together, including the warmth, the laughing, and the sense that someone was always there. Now everything seemed so far away, like though it belonged. A life that was no longer mine. After several days, he stopped making calls and sending SMS. I initially hoped that he would get in touch, that he would reconsider, and that he would return, but nothing happened. I tried to divert myself by going out with friends or working, but it didn't make the void go away. I kept thinking about him, about what I had done, and about what was evaporating. About 2 weeks after his departure, I found myself sitting in our living room one evening, surrounded by the items we had always shared. I rubbed my fingers through the old photo albums, recalling how we used to fantasize about the future and giggle over the memories. Now those dreams looked so far, so unattainable. I received the call at that moment. Although it came from David's phone, I didn't recognize the voice when I answered. The voice belonged to someone else, a lady. "Is this Emma?" she said in a composed, although assertive, tone. My stomach dropped. She answered, "Yes, this is Emma. Who is this?" "I'm Olivia," she said. The words were like a kick to the gut. "I've been seeing David for the past week. I thought you should know. I was having trouble breathing. The ground seemed to have been torn out from under me. All I could do for a while was look at the phone in shock, trying to make sense of what she was saying. I was unable to complete the question. I could already feel a knot tighten in my chest as the tears began to flow. "Yes," she responded, sounding more subdued now, almost contrite. I wanted to yell, "I know it's hard, but I think you should hear it from me." I wanted to yell, demand answers, and toss my phone. All I could do, though, was sit there and let her words sink in. David was no longer there. Somehow, hearing it from her made the fact that he was with someone else much worse. She was genuine and present where I used to be, so she wasn't simply a stranger. I managed to ask, my voice trembling, "Why are you telling me this?" Olivia stated, "Because I think you deserve to know. I know this is hard, and I didn't want to cause more pain, but I think it's time for you to face the truth. He's not coming back." I wasn't sure what to say. How could I react to that kind of thing? For what seemed like an age, there was stillness on the other end of the telephone. I hung up without saying anything else at last. Now more than ever, David's absence seemed inevitable. It all felt so strange. The lady who had taken my place, the life he was now creating without me. I had always assumed that he would leave for a specific reason, like a major falling out. However, this one was unique. It was quiet and strategic. Without warning, without even the grace to tell me himself, he had made his decision. I let myself feel the full weight of the situation for the first time in weeks. I felt lost and angry and heartbroken. How had we arrived? How had I changed from being everything to him to being simply another part of his history? The tears I'd been suppressing it spilled over at last. I wept for the person I had lost, for the life we had together, and for our shared love. I wept for the version of myself that I had sacrificed in this relationship, but above all else, the woman who had spent so much time thinking that everything would be okay. The truth of what had transpired began to sink in as the days stretched into weeks. The hurt and rage I was feeling started to change into something stronger. No longer was it only about David. It was no longer about Olivia, the sorrow, or the treachery. It has to do with me. I began to see myself clearly for the first time in a long time. I had lost sight of who I was because I had spent so much of my life trying to live up to standards, satisfy people, and keep my relationship going. I had neglected to foster my own aspirations and objectives because I was so engrossed in David's world and the notion of what we were meant to be. I had given him and us everything, but it had not been enough in the end. The pivotal moment occurred one day as I was reading through an old journal while sitting by myself in the peace and quiet of the house. I hadn't done anything with it in years. Before I met David, before things became complicated, I had written in it. I discovered a side of myself that I hadn't considered in a while as I turned the pages. I was hopeful, self-assured, and ambitious. Unapologetically, the lady who had written those words was herself. She thought she could accomplish anything, and she didn't care what other people thought. I didn't recognize that woman. I came to the realization that I had permitted myself to become smaller in the shadow of my relationship and to put the happiness of another person before my own. David was not who I believed him to be, and I was not who I had become during our marriage. I wasn't supposed to be this version of myself, one who had been scared to speak my mind or defend myself. I felt a strong, silent resolution take hold of me at that very instant. I refused to let this define who I was. The woman I had worked so hard to become before we met was not going to be destroyed by David's desertion. I had to relearn who I was. I had my own life to live, and I had my own aspirations to pursue. I began making minor adjustments the following day. I scheduled a weekend vacation to a location I had always wanted to see, but had never had time. 2. And I called up old acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. I enrolled in a yoga class since I had always wanted to do it, but had never had the time. I was gradually reestablishing contact with the woman I had lost, piece by piece. One evening, while enjoying a cup of tea on my couch, I noticed that I was grinning. By no means was I grinning because I was relieved that David was no longer with me. However, I came to the realization that, for the first time in a long time, I was happy with my identity. To feel whole, I didn't require the approval of others. David didn't have to prove my value to me. Everything I needed was within me. It wasn't always easy, and occasionally the loneliness returned. The man I had loved was still missed. His absence still hurt, but I also came to the realization that I was stronger than I had ever thought. I was beginning to live for myself for the first time. I had no idea what lay ahead. I wasn't sure whether I would ever be able to look at David without feeling hurt, or if I would ever fully move past what had happened with him. However, I was aware that I was making progress, which was a win in and of itself. I had made great progress in the months following David's departure. When I initially learned about him and Olivia, I was a broken woman. But now I was different. I had discovered a strength within myself that I was unaware of. I was finally content with who I had become after rebuilding my life piece by piece. Although the past continued to haunt me, it was no longer in charge of me. A surprise message arrived one evening while I was browsing through my phone while enjoying my coffee at a cafe. The text said, "Can we talk?" And it was from David. I felt my heart halt for a second. I had long since stopped waiting for him to get in touch, and I hadn't heard from him in a very long time. I no longer believed that we would ever mend what had been damaged. I had persuaded myself that living without him was preferable. But here he was, attempting to contact me. With my fingertips hovering over the screen, I gazed at the message. Desperate for closure or to make things right, the previous version of myself would have hurried to respond. The new me, however, was someone else. I no longer required his explanation or apology. I was stronger since I had already recovered, but I couldn't help but wonder why he was contacting me now. I pondered for a few minutes before deciding to answer. I was conflicted. "What do you want, David?" he asked almost instantly. "I've been thinking a lot. I made a huge mistake. Can we meet?" A part of me wanted to tell him to go back to Olivia, to tell him how much pain he had caused her, to simply reject him. But there was interest in another part of me, the part that had healed and matured. I had changed since we first met, and I was no longer the same girl who had wept over his leaving. I had to determine for myself whether this was a sincere apology or merely another self-serving action on his behalf. We decided to get together at a park, somewhere calm and neutral. He was standing there when I got there, looking as lost as I had when I first saw him leave. He was also unusual. Instead of his typical assurance, there seemed to be a level of uncertainty that I had never seen before. When he saw me, he murmured softly, "Emma, I never wanted to hurt you." I crossed my arms and nodded. He winced, and for the first time, I could see sincere sadness in his eyes as he said, "But you did. I know I was selfish. I was blind to everything I had, and I let it slip away. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." The apology I had been waiting for was finally there. However, I came to the realization that I no longer required it. I already had. All set. It was for me, not for him, that I had forgiven him. I would only end up hurting myself if I held on to that rage. "David," I answered steadily, "I've moved on. I'm at ease now that you're gone." He gazed at me, searching my eyes as though he were trying to find the lady he used to know. But I had changed. I felt pleased with the person I had become. "Good for you," he muttered. "You deserve happiness, Emma, more than I ever gave you." A tiny smile appeared on my lips as I nodded. "I am happy now, and I don't need you to be part of that happiness." After a little period of silence, I understood that the burden I had been bearing for so long had finally been lifted. I had given myself closure, so I didn't need it from him. I didn't feel the resentment or rage I used to when we said our goodbyes that day. I was only appreciative of the knowledge gained and the development brought about by the suffering. David was no longer the author of my story, but he had been a part of it. I now held the pen, and I was in charge of writing my future. I felt genuinely free for the first time. Get heartwarming, real stories by subscribing to our channel. Become a part of a community where everyone has strong feelings, and each story offers a unique viewpoint. Click the bell to receive weekly updates so you don't miss out.